Okay, we'll break our class tonight up into 3 parts. Part 1, I want to focus on translating English into our symbolic language. I don't know if you guys are doing any of the e-logic exercises, but it's crucial for one part of your test, at any rate. So we're going to start off with these English statements because the author has collected some perfectly fine, but maybe unusual ways of making conditional statements, disjunctions, maybe some conjunctions in the English language. You've got to know how to deal with them. So we'll do a few of those, some of the more problematic ones. Then we'll turn to the English language arguments from which I'm going to select those on your test. We want to make sure we can at least translate those, because if you don't get the translation correct, anything else you're going to be doing with them is going to be guesswork. And while we're doing those English language arguments, we'll practice both our long truth table and our shorter method. Now, that long truth table should have that down. But I think after just a couple more examples to refresh your memory, you should be fine with them. Third part of the class tonight, we'll have a look at some of those difficult translated arguments, difficult to use the shorter method on. The ones on your test are difficult. If I can remember, I can tell you what exercise bank I'm taking them from, if I can remember. And then I need to tell you a lot of things about how the test is going to be scored. So, it's our class this evening. Any questions before we start? Well, I think it's going to be easier to do the work on the dot cam. I hope the cam is picking up my voice, but we'll find out. Or my online students will find out, I guess. This is on page 308 of your 14th edition. It starts on 308. This would probably be the second page of the exercise. I think we've done some of these. But unfortunately, the author doesn't give you a key in this exercise. The key is a list of the uppercase letters you use to translate the simple statements that the argument, or in this case, the sentence, contains. That key is going to be provided on your test. Absolutely. Each of these sentences contain only 3 component simple statements. So even though it lacks a key, I think this is all we need to know. It would be a pretty easy matter to translate that English into our symbolic language. Now, all the simple statements in the key are affirmative. There will never be any negated statements in the key. It's up to us to recognize when one or more of these, is somehow negated in English. And there are several ways to form a negation in the English language. Also in the key, the order in which the letters and therefore the statements are given, they'll be the same order that the letters occur in your translation. But I think we're going to find out tonight, not necessarily in the English. It might not be first, second, and third. But in your translation it should. That's a useful bit of information. Okay, let's start out with number. Okay, well, number 9 is a good one to start out with. There's something I don't believe we've encountered before. It's obviously a compound statement, because you have 2 of our simple statements, the one referring to Argentina, 3 of them, Brazil and Chile, and only 1 sentence. So somehow they have to be put together as one of our complex compound statements. I think the unusual thing that you'll notice here, well, first of all, this is going to be a curl added to the statement Argentina mobilizes. That's what it says in our key. Argentina mobilizes. This says they do not. So that's one way to know to add a curl. But then I think the more unusual thing is the word pair neither nor. What do you think we should do with that?
It's a curl of the disjunction. Either or, right?
Yeah, actually, there are a couple ways to translate this. They're logically equivalent statements. But we're going to lay down the law right now and take maybe the more obvious translation. And that is, yeah, it's going to be a negated disjunction. It's going to be a negated wedge, so that wedge has to be in punctuation. Right? If you just put a curl in front of the left-hand disjunct, you're not negating the wedge, you're negating the left-hand disjunct. Correct? Give me some semblance of understanding. Which is the negated disjunction? The top one or the bottom one?
The top.
The top one. Yeah, so look, here's the rule. Neither nor. Neither nor indicates a disjunction. The whole thing of which is negated. Are you going to ask me about the logically equivalent translation of
I was going to ask.
not P and not Q?
Yeah.
It means the same thing, but forget about that. Forget he said that. No, because it's going to change the way your truth tables look. Okay, so we all have to be on board with this one. Neither nor is a disjunction negated.
And that changes both.
It's not going to change the validity because they mean the same thing, but it's going to change the way your tables look. And as far as the shorter method is concerned, the way in which it's done. But it's not going to change the validity of the argument. Okay, so we have a horseshoe here, a negated disjunction there, and this is going to require some punctuation. Oops. I already put my punctuation in. Sorry. I was going to ask you what you think about it. Actually, I think the matter of how to punctuate it, you see, you could have those, we could have those parentheses here. Then the whole thing would be a disjunction. But there are two reasons not to do that. The first word in English would be either, right? Because the statement would be a disjunction, but the first word is not either. It's if. And then if we're going to agree to translate neither nor as a negated disjunction, well, that ends the matter. Once we put the parentheses around that wedge, it requires no further punctuation. Let's look at
We had put like
what
parentheses with the curl in front of the B and in front of the C inside the parentheses. Would that have mattered?
You said forget about that.
this.
And then one on the C as well.
Oh,
Like negative, not B.
no. These do not mean the same thing.
Okay.
Absolutely not. No. This, however, does mean this. Yeah, it does. But that's coming up in test 3. Actually, test 4, finally. So forget about it. Okay, let's see. Number 11 is interesting. We found out in my first class tonight. Let's see, what can we notice about this? It is not the case that, see, our simple statement is Argentina mobilizes. So that's another way of making a negation in English. It is not the case that. Does not. It's not the case that. Oops. It's not the case that. And we obviously have a horseshoe here. Here are our simple statements: Argentina, Brazil, Chile. This is negated too. Will not. Right? Now, I think what we found was interesting about this is that the author doesn't use the word both here. So you don't have to use the word both. You should, if you know what you're talking about in English. But you don't have to. I don't frankly think many people know about it. And without that word both, we're not sure if that conjunction should be in punctuation or if the horseshoe should be in punctuation. And the weird thing we noticed about it in my first class today is that when you read it back against the English, both translations are read exactly the same way. And that's a problem. Remember, we learned to read our symbolic language because it's the only way to tell that you've translated and punctuated it correctly. You read it back against the English, key words are spoken. But I think I was careful to say like 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 times out of 100. It doesn't always work. But I'm going to show you a reason to make a decision here on where that punctuation goes. We should probably be agreed on a translation without parentheses. See, what are we on, 11? Okay, we all know it's curl A, then a horseshoe, a curl B, a dot, then a C. Okay, so there are 2 ways to punctuate that. And they don't mean the same thing. Absolutely not. We could put the parentheses around the horseshoe, that is curl A, horseshoe, curl B. Or we could put them around the dot. Okay, just because the author doesn't use the word both doesn't clear it up. But I'm going to use this comma here as a clue. See that comma right there? That suggests something about the punctuation. That is that curl B is not to be included with C, but kept separate from it. And the only way to keep it separate is by putting your parentheses around the horseshoe. Right? Right. So if you'll notice, if we abandon our use of the word both, because in English it is not absolutely necessary. See, we have a problem here that these 2 are read exactly the same way. If not A, then not B and C. If not A, then not B and C. So it's a problem. But that comma is a clue. And I don't think that I would have you make this decision on the test. But many of these, yeah, you probably are going to encounter on the test. Like, for example, number 12. You probably should be thinking that it's a horseshoe. What's your translation? What do you suggest? I'll be here all night.
Is it B horseshoe A?
It is not B horseshoe A.
Is it A horseshoe B?
It is A horseshoe B. So there's no rule that says you have to state the antecedent of a horseshoe first, then the consequent. Antecedent in symbolic logic doesn't even mean comes first. And consequent doesn't mean comes last. The antecedent of a horseshoe is that statement, simple or compound, that's associated with, for lack of a better way of explaining it, the if part of the relationship. No matter where that if this is written or spoken, that's the antecedent, right? And the consequent is that statement, simple or compound, that's associated with the then part of the statement.
So number 13 and B horseshoe A.
You're not there yet. It is not B horseshoe A.
Okay.
So let me point out something that I suggested about your key and how you could use this to your advantage. So I said that in the key, the uppercase letters and the corresponding simple statements, they're going to be listed in the sequence in which they occur in your translation, not in the English. See, Brazil will do such and such a thing was written first in the English, and Argentina will do so-and-so was written second. But if A comes first in your key, that's what's coming first in your translation. It's the way we do it. That's not the best way to go about getting the correct translation, but you can use it to your advantage. So what about 13? I could have sworn we discussed this before.
A horseshoe B. B horseshoe
It is not A horseshoe B.
B horseshoe A.
It is B horseshoe A.
I just asked
Why?
you that.
What?
I just asked you that and you said no.
I could have been wrong. What did you say it was?
B horseshoe A.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have this on tape, you know.
No, I was trying to figure out what was wrong with my brain. It's all good.
Yeah, the question is why? So, look, we have three similar sounding words or phrases. We have if then, we have only if, and we have if and only if. You all know what if and only if is. It's the tribar. If then is the standard but not necessary way of making a conditional statement. So what is only if? So you need to make a note of this or remember it or do your exercises or something, because you've got to know what to do in these cases. Only if is a way of expressing necessity in English. And the components of a horseshoe are sufficient or necessary. The antecedent is sufficient for the truth. Its truth is enough. It's sufficient for the truth of the consequent. And the consequent is necessary for the truth of the antecedent. So to make a long story short, only if means is necessary, and consequence of horseshoes are the necessary components. So Argentina, that goes in the consequent position. Number 18, we can go down to 18. Camera, just make a noise. Unless, this is obviously in between two simple statements, so it must correspond to one of our symbols. Question is, which one? Okay, jot it down and remember it. Unless is the same as or. Simply a wedge. What do we want, 18 or 19? 17? 18. Oh, we have 3 unlesses here. This requires punctuation. Where shall we put the parentheses?
Around A and B.
I would think not because of that comma. See that comma? Keeping Argentina mobilizes from the rest of the statement. You understand what I mean? Like, keep this separate. Do not include it in punctuation. You might be wondering, how come the word either is not there? Well, it never has to be there in a disjunction in English. '20 brings up an interesting point. Those mean exactly the same thing. And translating it either way could not possibly change the validity of the argument, because they mean exactly the same thing. But they are going to change the way your truth tables look, and that's not good, because I'm going to ask you about your truth tables. So you would have columns in different places. So I think the way the sentence is structured suggests one of the two. If unless means a wedge, we have this unusual situation here. So that's not right. So I would suggest, what would you suggest fixing this up as? You want to move the wedge over or move B over here? Let's move the B over. So we want that B to come first in this case. A couple more maybe. 21. I just told you about this. What do you think about that? If Argentina's mobilizing is said to be sufficient, does that make it the antecedent to the consequent? It makes it the antecedent of a horseshoe. It doesn't matter where that's stated in the writing. If Argentina's mobilizing is a necessary condition, what does it make Argentina's mobilizing? Antecedent or consequent? Consequent. It doesn't matter where it's stated in the sentence or in the argument. It automatically becomes the consequent of a horseshoe. Okay, let's look at some arguments. We may have done a few of these, I'm not sure. I should be writing this stuff down. Not. Again, the author does not include a key, so I already started marking this up from my first class to help us out. They contain very few simple statements, like I think 3, so it's not going to be hard to keep them straight. What we want to do is, your English language arguments on your test are coming from this exercise bank. Even if we don't get around to every one of them in class, there's only 10 of them there. And And 3 of those are in the back of the book. So make sure you can translate all of these. We're going to do many of them, maybe all of them right now. So we're going to translate them, agree on the translation, then we're going to do the long truth table proof, and then the shorter procedure.
What's the date?
This is 322 of the 14th edition. Well, what can we notice about this? Let me remind you that in translating an argument, each complete sentence, and that is ending punctuation period. Okay? No matter how long, each English sentence has to be translated as either an entire premise or the entire conclusion. You can't break up an English sentence into 2 lines of translation, 2 premises or a premise and a conclusion, or 3 or 4 for that matter. Secondly, in these exercises, the authors put the conclusion last in every case. So we're at least relieved of the responsibility of finding the conclusion. So in the first sentence, we have 2 simple statements. Greece strengthens its democratic institutions. Hungary will pursue a more independent policy. Well, that's very simple. There's our horseshoe. It's just G, horseshoe, H. I'm going to write this out horizontally and get it ready for the long truth table proof. Second sentence, if, so another horseshoe coming up at least. Greece strengthens its democratic institutions. Horseshoe right here. Italian government will feel less threatened. Nothing to be negated. Simply G, horseshoe, I. These first few are really nice and easy. It's good. Then our conclusion is Hungary, another horseshoe coming up, pursues a more independent policy then, here's another horseshoe. The Italian government will feel less threatened. Do we all have that? Can anybody make me happy and tell me how we begin our so-called long truth table proof of validity? What do we want to do first?
We'll break it down to its, I can't remember the name, but the P, Q, and R. To represent that. At least that's what the textbook says.
No, I don't think that's right. Yes?
Would be the equation, the 2 to the power.
We use our formula to construct our initial guide columns of truth values. Does that ring a bell? Okay. What is our magic formula? It always starts with 2. You don't have to think about that. You raise it to the power equal to the number of unique simple statements in the argument. We have 3 unique simple statements. So we're going to cube 2. This is the only thing that's going to change. Okay, the first numeric value that your formula gives you, in this case 8, somebody make me happy and tell me what that refers to. The number of rows in our truth table. Rows are going left to right. I didn't leave myself enough room. So we have 8 rows in our truth table. Then what do we do to that 8? Divided by 2. So what does the next numeric value tell you? In this case, it's 4.
This
sequence of truth and false, the order of truth and false in the first individual simple statement.
Say it.
First simple statement, like on G, so it would be 4, so it's true, false, false.
Yeah, it tells us by how many alternate T's and F's under the first unique simple statement, in this case G. We're going to alternate them by 4. Beginning with always, what? True. You may at this time or later transfer that column to the other occurrence of G or any occurrence of that same simple statement. I'm going to wait. It's going to help me keep my rows straight. Back to our magic formula. Divide again by 2. What does that value tell you?
What is the next one?
Q. Sorry, the textbook says to break it to. I mean, is that wrong to do to make? So we have G, H, and I. The textbook says to make every single one of those like the standard Q, P, and R. I don't know why it says that, because that's not what we're supposed to do.
It doesn't say that.
Mine does, but I do have the 12th edition.
Doesn't say that. I have the 12th edition right here.
Like every single example, regardless of what the statement is, it's used P, Q, and R are used as the placeholders.
Not the English language arguments.
Isn't the second row of true and false? So it'd be true, false, false.
Like that?
Yeah, like that.
Yeah, well, first of all, this is not an argument that's been translated from English. We never use the lowercase letters to translate English into our symbolic language. This author is testing an argument form that's no argument in particular. That's why he's using variables. Later on, we're going to make arguments from these forms. We're not there yet. Secondly, the author has the unfortunate habit of making the guide columns under, in this case, the unique variables. In our case, it would be G, H, and I if we wanted to do it this way. We don't want to do it this way, because you have to transfer these truth values to other places in the argument, and I'll tell you how that could really screw you up. First of all, you're always moving across the page, sometimes great distances, a few inches. And it's easier, to make a mental error. But more than that, if we have let's say this is the first premise of his argument form. Let's suppose that said R horseshoe Q. No, let's say this said R horseshoe Q. Okay? So R is then the antecedent and Q the consequent. And people forget they have to read them in their proper order from antecedent to consequent. But they may be listed over here in a different order. That's not good. Do you understand what I'm explaining? Do I have to draw it out? We don't do it this way. My way's better. Two. Alternate T's and F's by 2, beginning with T under the next unique simple statement. In our case, H. You may at this time either transfer the column to the other H, or every occurrence of H, or wait. I'm going to wait. But I'm gonna transfer my G right now. It's just gonna help me keep my rows and columns straight. You don't want to get all squirrely. They're harder to read. G is the same statement in this argument wherever it occurs. If it's true, it's true. If it's false, it's false. So you're simply transferring its column to G. Now I'm going to go back to the magic formula. After the number of rows, each successive numeric value the formula gives you tells you how to construct your columns under unique simple statements. It's always going to boil down to 1. Always. Doesn't matter if it's 64 rows long. So under I now, we're going to alternate E and F by 1, beginning with P. Transfer H, your conclusion. It's column. Oops, no kidding.